All right, so you probably have figured out by now that fractions and decimals are basically the same thing. It's just a different way to express that value. They both show parts of 1, but there's different ways that we can show them. So we're going to use this paper here to help us show that relationship and make sure we've got a solid understanding of the relationship between a fraction and a decimal. All right, so we're going to write each fraction as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. Okay, so we're going to start out with that first, and then we're going to shade the grids to show that those fractions are equivalent. All right, so I'm going to do this first one with you. So if we want to turn this into hundredths, remember creating equivalent fractions, we multiply by the same number on the top and the bottom because we want our denominator to be 100. Okay? So this is going to give us 10 100ths. So I'm going to color in one here. And I'm going to actually color in 10 here. And as you can see, it's exactly the same. Okay? So all I did to turn this from 1/10 into 10/10 was they told me that my denominator had to be 100. So I asked myself, well, what times 10 equals 100? I know that 10 times 10 equals 100, so I went ahead and did that. And whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So I got 10 100ths. This diagram has been broken up into tenths, so I just colored in 1/10. But this one has been broken up into hundredths, so I colored in 10 hundredths. You go ahead and try number 4 on your own. I want 8/10 written as hundredths here, and then the diagram's colored in. All right, so I'm going to multiply by 10 on the top and the bottom and get 80 100ths, right? I'm going to color in kind of sloppily 8/10, and now I'm going to color in 80 100ths. All right? Not too bad, right? Go ahead and do number 5 on your own. You're doing the same thing. All right, 5/10 times 10 on the top and the bottom gives me 50 100ths. That's going to be 5/10, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 50 hundredths. They are equivalent. All right, so now we're going to write this fraction as in exercise 3 as a decimal. Okay, so this decimal should look exactly the same, because we're going to have that 1/10 is equal to 1 100th, which is, 10 100ths. Ooh, that's a different number. To 10 100ths, which is equal to 1/10. Okay, or 10 100ths. Okay, so look here. 1/10 is equal to 10 hundredths. We've proved that here by making an equivalent fraction. So we've proved it with math and we've proved it with pictures. I know that this is equal to 1/10, but if I tack on a 0 and put a 0 into the hundredths place, I can call this number 10 hundredths. I can call it 10 hundredths or I can call it 1/10. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. It's the same number. All right. So now turn 8/10 and 80 100ths into a decimal. So I'm going to start you off by writing 8/10 equals 80 100ths equals what as a decimal? All right, so this is 8/10. I have a 0 in the ones place and an 8/10. If I wanted to write this as 80 100ths, I would write 0, 80, 0.80. Okay, go ahead and try number 5, or this one right here on your own. I want 5/10 or 50 hundredths as a decimal. All right, so I wrote 5/10 equals 50 hundredths, which is equal to 5/10, which is equal to 50 hundredths. It's all the same number. All right, so now we're looking at all these equivalent ways to represent these numbers, okay? So equivalent just again means equal. You've seen that term before. I'll do number 9 with you first. So we're looking for everything that matches 6/10. So we have 6/10, 6/100, 6/100, 6/10, and 6/100. All right. So 6/10 is obviously equal to 6/10 in word form. Now 6/100, why are these not the same thing? Sometimes people get confused and they write 6/10 in the improper way. And they think that these two are the same. They're actually not, because we have to look at place value. This is a 0 in the 10th place, and this is a 6 in the 100th place. That completely changes the value. Those two are not equal. So we can say that 6/10 is equal here, but that's about it, because this is 6/100 and this is 6/100. These are not the same thing, because if I take 6/10 and I multiply by 10 on the top and the bottom, I get 60/100. I do not get 6/100. So that's why we multiply by the top and the bottom for equivalent fractions. That's how we know something is actually equivalent. And this one is 6/100. So that's not going to be equivalent. So the only equivalence ones here are this in fraction form, this in word form, and this in decimal form. Go ahead and try number 10 on your own. You are looking for all the ones that are equivalent to 30/100. All right, so we've got 30/100, 3/10, 30/100, 3/100, 3/100, and 3/10. All right, so let's think about all the ways that we can write this. So I know right away that this one is going to be equivalent because when I say them, they sound exactly the same. Okay, 30/100, 3/10, 30/100, 3/100, 3/100, 3/10. Okay, so here's where you have to pay attention. I can go back too. So I can, if I want to turn 30/100 into tenths, I can divide by 10 on the top and the bottom. And when I do that, I actually end up getting 3/10. Okay, so 30/100 is equal to 3/10 because I multiplied by 10 on the top and I divided by 10 on the top and the bottom. So 3/10 is equivalent. So that means all forms of 3/10 are also equivalent. Go ahead and look at number 11. You're looking for everything that's equal to the decimal version of 2/10. All right, so we have 2/10, 2/10, 20/100, 2/100, 20/100, and 2/100. All right, so I know these two are equivalent. 20/100, well, 20/100 is going to look like this. Is that the same thing? Let's ask ourselves. So this is 2/10 and 20/100. All I've done is added a 0 so I can say it in hundredths. So yes, this is the same thing. 2/100, when I write that as a decimal, that looks like that. That is not the same thing. 20/100, that's the same thing I got right here. 2/100, that's not the same thing either. All right, go ahead and look at number 12. All right, I have 7/10. So I have 70/100, 7/100, 7/100, 7/10, and 70/100. All right, well, this one is a dead giveaway. 7/10. It sounds exactly the same as 7/10. Okay, I know that 7/10 is going to be equivalent to 70/100 because if I turn this into a fraction and I multiply by 10 on the top and the bottom, I get 70/100. Okay, and looky there, I've got that there as well. All right, so I want you to be able to recognize them in all of their equivalent forms. So there you go.